Welcome back to the Pro Series podcast. This is episode 118, and today's guest is Paul Thompson. Paul is a real estate investor and also an entrepreneur that helps other wanting entrepreneurs get out of that 9 to 5 mindset and help them go after the bigger goals in life. So if you are struggling in your 9 to 5 job and want to take that leap into entrepreneurship, this is the episode for you. But before we get into this episode, like, subscribe, and review this podcast on wherever you listen to podcasts. And now I hope you enjoy episode 118 with Paul Thompson. Paul, thank you so much for hopping on the Pro Series podcast today. Excited to talk to you about your expertise and everything on this Saturday morning.
Yeah, I have a cup of coffee here. It's a little early on a Saturday morning, and I don't often do podcasts this early in the morning, so I've fully caffeinated and brought the energy.
That's good. That's awesome. I like to hear that. So let's start off and talk about a little bit about you and how you started off in the business and a little bit about your business.
Yeah, so I was traditionally trained as an engineer, got an engineering degree, and went into the internet service provider space and information technology space and worked in that for 17 years. And about 15 years into that career, I just had this nagging feeling that I wasn't living up to my potential, that I'd kind of taken a tract that I just didn't feel comfortable doing for another 25 years in my 40-year career or so. I wanted to find something that was a little more rewarding, and I'd always kind of fantasized and dreamt about doing something on my own, but I always told myself, well, I'm just a risk-averse person. And when the reality was I was just afraid of failing. And I had a wake-up call moment on a vacation where I had an opportunity to extend my vacation. I worked for the technology company that helped make the technology of virtual work possible. Most of my employees did not work in the office. We always did Zoom calls and or conference calls at the time. And my wife's a stay-at-home mother, so she didn't have any kind of scheduling conflicts. My kids were out of school, and we could extend our vacation for a week. But I couldn't because I called my boss up and said, hey, I'm going to work from the beach next week. I'll do my normal schedule. He's like, oh, no, we don't do that here. Get your tail back to work. I expect to see you in the office, but in seat Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Click. Like, okay. I was pissed. But what else could I do? I was a single income family. I needed that job more than they needed me. And so I tucked my tail between my legs and I went back to work that next week. But it lit a fire under me. I was like, I am never going to be in a situation where I have to ask permission from somebody else, like my boss, to spend time with my family. I was going to somehow flip that script. And that's where my entrepreneurial journey began is, okay, I want to take control of my life. How else can I earn an income, build a business where I'm in control?
I feel like there's two different ways to become an entrepreneur. I think as soon as you come out of school, you start your business.
Yeah.
But the majority of the people, it's they work a 9 to 5 or work for another company and realize and get that nagging feeling like you explained that gets them out of it. What was that? Was that the turning point that completely got you out of it?
Yes, it took me a while to build an alternative income stream. But was the impetus for my change of behavior. I was no longer, dreaming and fantasizing and wishing and hoping. I was determined, and I considered a lot of different options. I considered buying an insurance company. I considered, buying into some sort of franchise, and I felt like I was just going to be buying myself another job. But in this case, I'd be paying for it, and I would still be trapped in an office and not be able to escape. So I landed on real estate as a way for me to get out. I was able to buy a few rental properties and just kind of inch my way into it. And I was able to do that on the nights and weekends for several years before I actually went out on my own. And so I kind of mapped out a 3-year plan where I was going to buy rental properties that was going to replace my income. And 2 years into that 3-year plan, my employer laid me off, reduction in forces kind of situation. And I was pretty much prepared, but I didn't know it was coming then exactly. And so it was still a bit of a shocking moment, but I had been preparing for 2 years. I wasn't caught completely flat-footed wondering what in the world I was going to do.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of people that get stuck in that awakening that they want to move but they don't do anything.
Right.
They kind of forget that you could do that test drive on the side between the 5 to 9 after your 9 to 5. And
Absolutely.
I mean, but a lot of my guests on this show start out that way. They have a main income stream, regular
Uh-huh.
9 to 5, and they start. But it's interesting that when you had that awakening, you didn't really know what field you really wanted to go into. That's very
Mhm.
interesting because usually it's like an interior designer on here or a real estate
Right.
agent that wants to go out on their own. So they know they have that drive. But it's interesting that you didn't. How did you figure out real estate was it?
It took me a little while. I wanted to put myself into the investor's seat or into the business owner's seat. I was very careful not to step from the employee to the self-employed person.
Gotcha.
Because I think a lot of people who call themselves entrepreneurs are really just self-employed and they bought themselves another job. And a good way to test this, and this is part of the transition that you need to make as an entrepreneur and a business owner is, are you really a business owner or does the business own you? And it's, could you step away for 3 months and the business will still run without you? And for most people listening to this, you're probably not in that stage yet, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Start building towards that. And you can, what I do is I run little experiments. I've been doing this for several years. I'll go away for 2 weeks. And I'll plan for it. I'll put processes in place, and I'll just go away for 2 weeks and just see how bad it is. And most of the time, it's either one or two phone calls, one or two things that people call me about, and maybe I need to step in, and maybe I don't. Maybe it's just like, well, you just wanted to hear my confirmation, or really I didn't set up answers or solutions so that you can kind of self-serve. The principal, I'm the principal and they're the agent, effectively, right? They're the employee, and I haven't given them the right authority or the right responsibility to be able to handle whatever comes at them.
Yeah. And I know we talked off camera a little bit that entrepreneurship is kind of something that everybody goes in blindfolded. No one really is taught anything, especially, I mean, I don't trying to think of like I always have conversations with people. What would I add to the education system
Curriculum.
in our
Yeah.
country? An entrepreneur, I get. I mean, they don't want to add it because they want you to supply and go
Right.
to jobs and stuff. So that makes sense. But in the same token, that life isn't meant for everybody. You know, there's some people that are
No.
meant to be entrepreneurs. And
Mhm.
how did you start going about this? Did you get a mentor? Did you read up on it? How did you go
Mhm.
jump in?
Great question. And I have a really kind of fun story. I
Okay.
mean, like I couldn't have written it myself. It was such a good story. So you hear about this, go find a mentor. And it's not like mentors are just standing on the street corner,
Yeah.
saying, here I am, I'm going to take good care of you. It's, you really got to go and find somebody. And a lot of times you got to pay big bucks to go and find somebody. And
Mhm.
so I didn't have enough money to find a mentor and start a business and buy some rental property. So I just went around on the internet looking for somebody in my market, or at least near my market in my state, that was in the business that I thought I wanted to get into. And I reached out to several people just via cold emails and said, "Oh, I'm a developing business owner. I like to learn the business. I'm willing to exchange my time or money and whatever I can to help you in your business. And in exchange, I want to learn the business so that I can run it myself in Little Rock. And you're in, another market an hour or two away. I don't want to compete with you. I'm going to make sure I wasn't going to be a competitor." And one person called me back, and he was from a small city in Hot Springs, about an hour away from me.
Mhm.
And he called me up and said, "Hey, yeah, I do mentorship. I don't charge for it, but I do have some requirements. And the first one is that you need to go buy the book, The Richest Man in Babylon, the real physical book, read it, make notes, highlight it, write a 3-page handwritten essay, and then mail that back to me in my P.O. box."
Oh,
And I was like, okay, if you say so. So I did that. And that was his way of testing how serious you were. And for the following 2 years or so, I probably wrote 7 or 8 different books or read different books and wrote handwritten essays. And he insisted that it be handwritten every time. And, probably like everybody else here, I don't write that much. And my hand was so cramped up from writing just 3 pages, because we don't do that as much anymore. And it was a really big eye-opening moment happened when I was writing one of those books, or one of those essays. So I can't remember what book it was, but I read some book, wrote out my my essay in Word or something, and then I was transferring it over in my handwritten format. And in the writing of that, I was realizing that a bunch of ego was coming out. I was saying things like, well, I'm a sophisticated person. I have business acumen. I'm a director. I have this kind of, and I could just tell, hold up, buddy. Like, you're stepping into a whole new industry. You need to eat some humble pie and realize that you're starting all over again. What you did over there might be some things that poured over, but you're starting over. So put your ego aside and sit down at the table with a great deal of intellectual humility and learn the business from the ground up. And that was a big moment I had because I was handwriting it.
Yeah. Did he analyze these essays too and like kind of talk to you about them?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
He would say, "What is your education plan?" And so I'd write out my education plan, and he would say, "Well, based on you wanting to go to one conference a year, then, or maybe 2 conferences a year, it's going to take you 10 years. I suggest you going to at least 4 a year, more like once a quarter instead of once a year." Like, okay. And so he recommended conferences, real estate based conferences that I could go to and learn. And I probably went to something like 30 weekend conferences over a 2 or 3 year period,
Wow.
maybe 5 year period. I can't remember exactly. I should have kept better count, but I went to a lot of conferences, and these weren't the kind of conferences where they're there to try and sell you a big sales package at the end. This was like these grand old men of real estate that have been in the business for 40 or 50 years, and they were just sharing information. They charged like $400 or $500, and it'd be at a kind of crummy hotel in Atlanta, and their marketing was terrible. They would still use like hand pamphlets, like little physical pamphlets to like get you to come to these conferences. But the people in the room knew so much about real estate, and I got something like a master's degree in creative real estate and single family business by going to those.
It was worth the networking.
There was networking value. The content was there, and I got to the point to where it's very rare that I get around somebody now who is in real estate that I can't talk to at a very high level. I mean, I've poured a lot of knowledge from those conferences and from the people I met there. What I did is I accelerated my outcomes and my knowledge base by putting in the work early.
Yeah. I mean, going back to what you said about mentors are kind of very hard. There's no like dating site for a mentorship. And it's very rare to find someone that is willing to take the time to help out someone, especially a stranger.
Right.
Because for the most part, you're going into an industry that you know nothing about, so
Right.
you don't know anybody. But when it comes to, I mean, I do a lot of social media consulting. So I know there's a lot of companies that can't afford social media consulting at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, there's so much free stuff online to get you started,
Yeah,
get your business going. Once you're able to financially get the mentor or the consulting fee, go and do it,
I
because you
agree.
that will get you to the next level, but you don't have to do it right away. Don't feel like just because you need to be broke to start out, because that's
Yeah.
not exactly what you need to
Yeah.
do.
Well, I'll second that because I agree with that statement. So when you're first getting started, there is almost everything you know is publicly available on podcast, internet, social media, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But you have to go and distill it, right? Is it you have to go and like find the signal from the noise.
Yeah.
The difference is when you get to the financial position where you can buy into a mentorship or like a next level mastermind or some sort of group that you can get around people of like mind who have been that path for you. I've done that several times now. I'm a member of several masterminds, and what you see is that there's all these other possibilities beyond where you are right now, and the people in the room that you've paid to be there with are completely a next level human, a next level personality. There's all kinds of different types of people in there. But if someone pays 25 grand to be a part of an annual membership for a mastermind, they have attracted the best and brightest and hardest working people to accelerate themselves. And there's this like kind of weird osmosis and kind of like energetic sense of being in those rooms where you're like, oh, okay, so I hear what you've been doing. And one of the questions that I've started asking when I go to those things is, who do you know that I should know? Here's my situation. Do you
Hmm.
know anybody you can recommend me to, or that you would refer me to? Here's a problem I'm trying to solve for. And that's the specific solution to your unique situation that you need and what you can often find inside of those groups.
I like how you said that because not a lot of people you go to those events and you talk to people, but you don't
Right.
ask them who else you should be talking to. That's good advice.
Yeah, someone else told me, and I was like, man, I learned that from going to a much lower paid mastermind, but he was
Yeah.
big on networking and like legitimately like making relationships. And he said that's one of the best questions you can ask is asking somebody like, who is it that you know that I should know? So it changes the conversation. You know how the typical way it goes is, what can I do for you? Or it's like, I don't know, like I don't know what to ask. But you change the question just a little bit, and it kind of creates their like, oh, okay, I can refer this person to somebody, and I've heard what they've needed. Like weird things happen. I've done this on stage before, where I'll stand on stage and there'll be 100 people in the audience, and I'll say, all your answers that you need are within this audience right now. You just don't have a platform to go talk to them. So
Yeah.
let's use this platform to talk about it right now. I said, so somebody stand up, tell me something you need, something specific. And one time someone said, I need to meet somebody who has a contact in NHL. I was like, does anybody in the room know anybody who has a contact in NHL? And sure enough, somebody in the room did. And I don't know anything about NHL. I don't know the rules. I don't watch it. I don't like it. But someone in the room did. And they were able to make a connection and solve whatever problem they had.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's almost kind of like I don't know about what it is for real estate investing, but I know in design world there's so many associations and online forums and
Yeah.
stuff you could attend and just if there's so many ways to get out there, you just have to put yourself out there.
Yeah, and I'm a natural introvert, and I'm not the
Same.
person that goes into. You are too. I'm not the kind of person that goes into a room of 100 people, 300 people, and I'm the life of the party. I mean,
Mhm.
I shrink away. It's just too much for me. I work better in much smaller groups, and so I found that the way I kind of get past that is that I find a way to become one of the speakers, and so I speak and share something from my heart, and naturally people will come to me afterwards because they just saw me, so I didn't have to do my introductions, and so I win the room by being in front of the stage.
Yeah, I just said, I am an introvert too. And do you find it easier to be in public situations when it's a work situation than a personal situation?
Yes, work, when there's a reason to be in the room and you have
Yeah.
something naturally in common, it's much easier.
It's funny. I've met so many introverts that are in a very public business and they say the same thing. There's like people were like, "You're not an introvert. You don't seem like an introvert at all when they're at a public or a business event." But you don't know us in like a personal setting, and that's when it is.
It's different. And I
Yeah,
think a lot of people misunderstand what an introvert and an extrovert are. Being an
yeah,
introvert doesn't necessarily just mean you're shy. What it means is that being around a lot of people takes energy from you.
yes,
Whereas you're being an extrovert, being around people gives you energy. So
mhm,
when I'm in a room, I can, you kind of raise my energy to match the room. But
mhm.
when I leave, I'm exhausted.
Oh
Whereas an extrovert is like, where's the next party?
yeah. You're like one. I can only do a couple events a week, and I'm
Yeah,
done.
I'm done. I'm
Yeah,
done.
I'm spent. So when was this change? And when did you get into real estate investing?
So let's see, 2015 is when I started, and
Okay.
2017 is when I was laid off. And so I've been a full-time real estate guy since then.
Okay. And then real estate investing, there's so many parts of it. What is your main, are you flipping? Are you
Mhm.
investing in small homes?
I've done it all. So if
Oh, cool.
it comes to single family, I have tried it all. I've done nearly everything that can be done in single family. And so I made some money. I started a couple businesses, and I found what I'm good at and what I'm not. What I'm not good at is being a property manager, dealing with tenants, not my strength. And being an operations person is not my strength. I'm a visionary. I like to have a big idea, and I'm a high upstart, low follow through personality. It's just like ingrained in me. So I
Mhm.
have great creative ideas, but I need to go tap somebody on the shoulder and say, okay, you need to take this, run with it, report back. And that's what I did in my professional life, actually, as in the corporate world. I went into management versus being an individual contributor. And so you naturally find yourself going towards something that you're good at. And so I have found that I need to be the guy who is speaking in front of the room and then having one-on-one conversations based on somebody who needs what I offer afterwards. So what I do now is I raise capital for my own fund that I run, and then I raise capital for individual like multifamily apartment complexes. So somebody will find 300 units in Houston, Texas, and I'll partner with them and help them raise capital and be a part of the team.
So, as you said, you touch pretty much every part of real estate investing. What is the one part of real estate investing you do not suggest someone that is trying to get into the industry start as their first part of real estate investing?
Oh, I'm not sure I've ever been asked that question before, but I like it. Like, what is the one thing to avoid? The one thing to avoid, and this is a little bit of a spin on the question, but the one thing to avoid is that which you don't know anything about. So that's why I tend to tell people start with like residential, like either single family or multifamily. Either way, I don't really care. But that's very intuitive to most people. Most people understand what is necessary in a house or an apartment for it to be desirable. That doesn't take a lot of extra learning to figure that part out. Whereas if you're like going into office or retail or storage facilities or whatever, there's just, or development for sure, there's just a lot more to learn. So unless you have some sort of a connection or insight that already gives you a competitive advantage, start with something that has the lowest level of the learning curve is as low as possible, so that you can kind of break the seal and be like, oh, okay, so I have now bought a duplex. I know what that process is. I know what escrow is. I know how to make sure the mortgage payment is getting paid. I'm able to raise money for it. And once you kind of get those principles down, then you can extend yourself to other disciplines or other asset classes if you want within real estate.
What's your favorite part of real estate investing?
My favorite part of real estate is owning assets that pay me an income and appreciate over time without me having to do that much work.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of reasons why very successful people use real estate as either as their vehicle for growth or as a diversion or a diversification play rather. So a lot of times once you make money, you have some cash to deploy, and that's what we want to get into as entrepreneurs. Is we want to be in a place where we own equity in something, and that might be our business, but then we're going to have cash, and you want to deploy that cash in other places. And real estate is often a very good diversification play.
And then what would be something that you'd never go back to, or are you still going and doing everything that you've always done?
It's a good question. Really good question. So one thing I won't go back to is really low income single family houses.
Okay.
There's a lot of people make money in it. Don't get me wrong. It's not like it can't work, but it's a lot of overhead and a lot of management. Typically, the lower the income, the higher the crime and the higher the headaches. But the cash flow tends to be higher. And but the real wealth in real estate is in owning the asset that appreciates. The cash flow is nice. It pays for your bills and whatnot, but that's not where the wealth in real estate comes from. The wealth in real estate comes from the equity, and lower income properties tend not to appreciate as much.
I think obviously real estate investment has always been there. But
Yeah.
after COVID, a lot of people have gotten those work from home type of jobs and have been traveling, and they put their house on, one of those vacation home websites that they could rent out houses. Do you see any disadvantages with a website versus an actual property management? Because when you're on the website, they're not property managers. It's literally just
It's the owner. Yeah.
You're just really it's a booking site.
Yeah, it's a booking site. So all Airbnb is a really sophisticated booking site that has brand advantage, right? And so there are competitors. There's VRBO. I think they call themselves Verbo, which sounds dumb. So I guess I'll call them Verbo. And then there's a few other competitors, right?
Yeah.
And then there's like the one-off, like this for Thanksgiving, me and my family went to a cabin in the Ozarks, and we rented from a specific place where they had their own website. and they had something like, I don't know, 10 or 20 cabins to choose from in the Ozarks. That was their specialty. And we went through their booking website. And so what's their advantage to doing that versus going to Airbnb? I think the question is, and there's pros and cons. Airbnb just has a really good brand awareness, and a lot of people just drives traffic.
Yeah.
But you're completely beholden to Airbnb's policies. So in our business, we do this as well. It's very small scale, but we advertise on Airbnb. But what we prefer to do is find a source of renters, of guests that would come to us. And so we do what we call 30-day stays or midterm rentals, where it's
Okay.
like for traveling professionals.
Mhm.
And so there is a company in my city that is a French company, and they build planes in Little Rock, where I live. And so we try and find their connection point, their HR contact, and just kind of get on the inside track for when they have people coming from France need to stay here for several months. They know that we're a good place to stay. So I prefer that situation over Airbnb because I'm in a lot more control. So that's the sliding scale of options that, as a host, that you're trying to play with. Is over here at Airbnb, I can get a lot of traction and a lot of eyeballs on my property, but I'm completely beholden to Airbnb's rules. And if they don't like what you're doing, they can just shut you down.
What is some criteria? Because not everybody's going to be in your area. So other people in the country that are trying to put this and get a property management company and looking and
Mm-hmm.
interviewing with people to figure out what's best for them. What are some red flags and what are some good things you should be looking for when you're looking for a property management company?
Yeah. So in the case of a midterm or short-term, like Airbnb style co-host is what they call it.
Okay.
If you're wanting that solution, which I think is a good idea because it takes you out of being the business operator and you being the business owner, I think it's really smart. You want to make sure you're in a good market that has demand and that there's not saturation and that the laws are favorable for Airbnb. If all those things check out, then you want to get a property manager. The property manager needs to have some experience. You should ask the property manager for some referrals, and the property manager is going to make or break your business, because in Airbnb's world, the customers are trained to get like response times in 5 minutes. And so you want to get somebody. So what I prefer is getting a medium-sized company that hasn't got so big that they can't pay attention to the details. And so I like to get somebody who is in your region. They focus on kind of the niche that you're in, and they just have room for you. Like, and they exist because they're a mom and pop shop, and they're going to run their co-host management business themselves, and you're one of their few clients that they work with.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know because I feel like there's so many people out there trying to, me and myself. I mean, I would love to put my house up for lease in, a year or so
Mhm.
and then buy another house and just keep the ball rolling and kind of doing that. So
So
some
as an
people
Airbnb or as a long-term rental,
what was that?
for your house and your situation, would you keep it as a long-term rental with, not furnished, or a short-term rental whether it's furnished?
I'd probably do long term.
Yeah, in the case of long term, it's a little bit easier to find a property manager because there's just that's a more relevant and common service, and
Yeah.
so much of the same advice applies. But in that case, getting a big company that knows what they're doing is probably fine because it's kind of what they do, and adding one more or two more long-term rentals to a portfolio is not a big deal as compared to an Airbnb that's much more high turnover and a high demand. So as a long-term rental, the advice would be getting a property manager that has their structure set up in such a way that their interests are aligned with your interests.
Hmm.
So I like to find a property manager who says, I don't get paid unless I successfully place a tenant for you. And there are some property managers that will charge extra for placing tenants, and so it's in their incentive to turn people over a lot. And as a long-term rental owner, you want people to stay in your property forever, and so
Oh
you
yeah.
want to incentivize your property manager for them to stay put.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, I definitely have to do long term because it's a booming area where I live, but it's not an
Perfect.
area someone wants to vacation.
Sure. Yeah. So long-term would be perfect. Well, and it's a lot less headache for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially furnishing and all of that stuff. I don't.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast today. I want to finish on where people could follow you, your website, any of that.
The best place to find me is at my website, pauldavidthompson.com. And I'm Paul David Thompson on most social platforms. So I have the curse of a common name, so I had to use all three of them, Paul David Thompson.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you again, Paul, for hopping on the Pro Series podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.